Now, I am so excited to introduce our next speaker. I know a lot of ladies and gentlemen have been looking forward to this talk. Kiera Vaclavik is a professor of children's literature and childhood culture at Queen Mary University in London. And basically, she is the authority on Alice-inspired fashion, and she is going to show us so much great stuff. I'm just going to make sure that she is able to. Here she is. Hi.
Hi.
Welcome. So nice to see you. Yet another UK speaker. Again, just what a world we live in that we get to hear your fabulous presentation from across the pond.
A pleasure and an honor to be here. The title of my talk is taken from a Disney promotional video of 2010. It's another way of saying that Alice is a style icon, and howsoever you put it, I firmly believe it to be true. The exhibition that's currently at the V&A in London gives us the chance to encounter some really extraordinary garments and photographs which testify to the wide-ranging and considerable influence of the Alice books on the fashion industry. Wonderful as they are, the pieces in the show are really only, I think, the tip of the iceberg. So if you're not going to be able to make it to the show in person, never fear. In the first part of my talk, I'm going to make the case for Alice's status as a style icon. I'm then going to look at when all this started. It's older than you might think, but not as old as the books themselves. I'll wrap up by outlining some reasons why this has occurred. I'll be trying to answer the question, why is it that Alice and the books she inhabits have become such a sustained, frequent and rich source of inspiration for the fashion industry? Well, I think it's worth pointing out from the outset, and it's wonderful sort of to have this opportunity to position thinking about sort of the very contemporary within the context of Carol's own daily life and interests and sort of habitus. It's worth pointing out, I think, from the outset that the fact that Alice is a style icon is a really incredible thing. It's pretty surprising. First of all, it's pretty unusual for books to exert such a long-lasting influence on what people wear. So any books. Other examples like Goethe's Werther, say, who had men across late 18th century Europe reaching for blue coats, yellow waistcoats and riding boots, had a far shorter sartorial shelf life. It's also remarkable that Alice is a style icon because although he was deeply interested in matters of dress, Carol himself was often adamantly anti-fashion, speaking out about what he saw as the abominations and horrors of anything from heeled shoes with pointed toes to leg of mutton sleeves. He favoured natural shapes and muted tones, advocated for practicality, comfort and ease of movement. The books themselves don't really scream fashion either. There's no especially close engagement with dress, at least not in any obvious way. So that's why I think lots of members of the society were actually quite bemused when I said that the work that I was going to do on Alice's visual identity was going to concentrate uniquely on the 19th century. And that was the focus of my book, Fashioning Alice. But there is already lots and lots to say in the 19th century, but my talk tonight is going to look at the kind of the focus on the sort of subsequent period. So all of those things then, between literature in general and its relationship with fashion, Carol specifically, and the Alice books, all of that makes a fairly unpromising start, I think, for a style icon. But Alice, as we'll see, and as we've already seen in quite a few of the brilliant montages and adverts from this evening, has really come a very long way. So how do we know, how can we tell that Alice is a style icon today? Well, partly it's because fashion people, with capital letters, say so. A London Fashion Week publication of 2015 explicitly referred to her as a trend doyenne. And why might they think this? What justifies this appellation? Well, it's because other people in fashion and fashionable people are so often dressing her, being dressed as her, and in a whole range of ways, alluding to the books she inhabits in their work. Just like illustrators or costume designers, leading designers have offered their own distinctive interpretations of her look. So here, for instance, you can see one of Galliano's Dior designs for Gwen Stefani's What You Waiting For video. In some instances, the engagement of a particular designer or artist is long-standing and profound. So I'm thinking of somebody like Vivienne Westwood, or the career of Tim Walker, whose most explicitly Alice-y work in the form of the 2018 Pirelli calendar shoot you're looking at now. And these more sustained engagements can offer really, I think, incisive new interpretations of and commentaries on the original works. The 2003 Annie Leibovitz shoot, from which this image of Alice and the Tom Ford White Rabbit is taken, is perhaps the best example of this kind of really meaningful engagement. And I'm going to be coming back to it in more detail later on, because I think it really does merit that kind of serious, in-depth attention. So as well as this in-depth engagement on the part of designers and artists, there's also the kind of, the other reason why Alice, I think we can refer to as being a style icon, is because of not just the depth, but also the breadth, sheer mass. Alice and her books are used as an organizing principle in countless clothing roundups and in fashion shoots and features galore all over the world. And it's interesting thinking about Christopher Myers' comments about that kind of where the Victorian England as the kind of crossroads of the world. And I think, you know, that global positioning of the books is really important, and we see it absolutely in her relationship with fashion from the beginning, as we'll see, and right the way through. But here are some examples to illustrate this point. So here's a shoot from Germany. Here's one from Argentina on the left, and Korea. Yeah, I think this is another Korea, and France to the right. So Alice makes regular appearances in both high-end fashion, in store windows and couture catwalks, and in the high street. So for couture, here's the window of Printemps in Paris in 2010. And here is Temperley in London in 2015. And for the high street, so I'll leave that advert there. It's great to see it actually in the context of all the other advertising that we've been able to see this from me this evening today. What happens after that, where I've stopped it, is Alice then morphs into various other fairy tale heroines. This was a Marks and Spencer's advert from 2013. She morphs into other fairy tale heroines before meeting Helena Bonham Carter and retrieving her dog. It's fairly bonkers, I think, that particular advert. And I have plenty of thoughts, especially about that fall scene, fall, F-A-L-L, scene. But I am not going to let myself get pulled down that particular dress-defying rabbit hole. So the point basically is Alice is used in advertising and store windows across the world. She and the books also inspire entire ranges by companies like Liberty or Furla and Marc Jacobs. She herself and iconography more generally, that's to say playing cards, teacups, chessboards, watch chains, adorn a vast array of garments and products. So if we put all of this together, that detailed, close and deep engagement, and then the sheer mass of occurrences, it makes it clear, I think, this is sort of what I would base my argument on. I would argue that that means that we can really safely say that Carol's heroine has become a true fashion phenomenon. So the next question is, when did all this start? And the quick answer is not straight away. Unlike characters like Werther, who I mentioned earlier, or Burnet's Little Lord Fauntleroy, Alice doesn't immediately spark a fashion craze. She and the books in which she existed were certainly modish, performed at society events, attended by the First Lady of the United States, no less, and appropriated for the menu cards of elaborate dinners. There's also an early reference in a Kansas newspaper in 1882 to Queen Olga of Greece, who wears her, quote, fair curling hair drawn back from the forehead with a comb, such as one sees in the pictures of Alice in Wonderland. So that's the First Lady, elaborate dinners, Queen Olga of Greece. So from the very outset, Alice-based style bears a certain distinction and celebrity panache. But most fashion journalism in the 19th century mobilizes the Alice books only really in the vaguest terms, referencing general plot features or peculiarities of written style, rather than mentioning Alice's own style, let alone the kinds of Alice-inspired looks that we've just been looking at together. And in the first 3.5 decades of her existence, Alice was by no means a reference point or inspiration in fashionable circles. She wasn't shaping what people were actually wearing. And it's not that hard to see why. Alice was initially and intentionally quite ordinary, a follower of fashion rather than a trendsetter. So as we can see, when we compare Alice with other little girls, all of these little girls appeared in print in the same year of publication as Wonderland. She's an ordinary middle-class girl of her time, familiar and recognizable to her contemporaries. For how this works in Looking Glass specifically, because of time constraints, I'll shamelessly point you to my book, Fashioning Alice. Another reason why Alice doesn't trigger a significant 19th century trend is that no one can quite decide what she looks like or what she should be wearing. If I asked you all now, don't worry, I'm not going to draw or describe Alice, I'm fairly sure that everyone here would have at least one and probably more of these: blue dress, pinafore, striped tights, hairband, black shoes, and also possibly some of these: young, slim, pretty, blonde, white. This is what has become what I refer to as the Alice look. It's so firmly established that it takes quite an effort to think of her differently. But it wasn't always thus. In the 19th century, there were already lots of different editions, spin-off items, and advertising. When you look at these, Alice is often blonde with a blue dress, but she can also be a brunette or a redhead, or indeed, as you can see here, a bluehead. In terms of her dress, a rich rainbow of shades was possible, including white, orange, yellow, green, blue, pink, and red, with the last three being the most popular. What I've christened the Alice look doesn't come about until at least half a century later, with the Disney animated feature of 1951, probably eventually establishing the final colour palette and silhouette. Interesting Alice fashion developments were afoot well before the Disney feature, however. By 1951, Alice had already been regularly used as a marketing device for garments, accessories, and appearance-related services. You can see a couple of those items here. And I particularly like this, I think, fairly terrifying Fifth Avenue facial, offering the prospect of going in as Alice and leaving as a queen. The overall look increasingly emerged as an organizing principle and reference point for fashion journalists, far from the fleeting allusions to Alice in fashion writing of the previous century. Alice starts giving her name to shoes, nail varnishes, and perfumes. Garments and accessories for adults and children alike, from overalls to bags and blouses, also began to carry images of Alice. These were items that housewives could purchase from magazines and mail order catalogues, but they could also be selected for Hollywood studio shoots for the likes of Deborah Kerr. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, people start then to emulate her look. This really seems to take off in the 1930s, the decade which, as we all know, witnessed celebrations for the anniversary of Carol's birth, the release of 2 film adaptations, and the staging of major theatrical productions. And it was the decade which saw the first ever major, and again global, Alice-inspired fashion phenomenon, when the Alice Band became the Alice Band. It hadn't ever been referred to as such before. Initiated by one Lady Abdi, a Russian-born socialite moving in surrealist circles in France, the Alice Band took the fashion world by storm. I love this so much. In this 1933 Vogue magazine feature, Abdi on the left and Lee Miller to the right model the style which was rapidly adopted across the world. Made from a wide variety of materials, from the most basic to the last word in luxury, it was worn by both adults and children in a whole range of contexts, from weddings, balls, and the races, to college lecture theatres, tennis courts, and the beach. Here is another feature from 1933, showing the same kind of take up, and then fast forwarding to the 1990s. And it's pleasing to me to see the tradition of the Alice Band's adoption by pioneering and creative women of Lee Miller's ilk, continuing with Amanda Gorman in her already iconic inauguration ensemble. And she said, and I have to say that I kind of got this from Grace Coddington when she was talking about the Leibovitz shoot, but I think it is definitely worth me nicking it off of her. But Amanda Gorman said about this look at the inauguration, "I truly wanted to continue the history of strong women in headbands." So she wrote that in an Instagram caption in February. "It was my mum who suggested I wear it horizontal with my thick braids. I highly suggest a headband crown for anyone wanting to stand taller, straighter, and prouder." So Alice's status today as a fashion favourite is then actually quite a long established phenomenon, as I hope I've made clear. What I want to do in the final part of my talk is to think about some of the reasons why this might be the case. Fashion people are notoriously roving and rapacious, taking inspiration from a huge range of sources. But why have so many turned to the Alice books specifically? There are lots of interweaving answers to this question, which I think is quite a lot harder to answer and more multifaceted than it might appear. So again, I'm going to refer back to the unsurety that Christopher Myers talked about. I am still grappling with this, and what follows are sort of some tentative steps towards an answer, followed by a closer look at the specific and I think especially important example to finish. So here goes. Firstly, I think Alice has become basically available to the fashion world because Alice is now instantly and universally recognizable. Her image and the iconography of the books more broadly has now crystallized. The Alice look has emerged, a Wonderland aesthetic has been established. A blue dress and white pinafore today mean Alice in the same way that a white gown and veil means a bride, and has the same connotations very often of femininity. And just a few visual cues, a playing card, a teapot, or a rabbit, now suffice to make the connection, to establish what it is that's being referenced. So this iconographic consensus means that Alice and the books can be used freely in the predominantly visual forms of fashion and fashion photography. Simply put, people get it. This also means that Alice and the books are ripe for non-verbal reworking and reinterpretation. Like the countless book illustrators and costume designers who've reinterpreted Carol's heroine, designers and stylists too can and have put their own stamp on Alice's look. So Alice is, for example, thoroughly Chanel'd or Lagerfeldered in this image from the Leibovitz shoot that I'm going to come back to in a moment. What designers and stylists choose to do with Alice and the books varies enormously. Alice and the Wonderland aesthetic more broadly can be by turns sweet and cloying, or much darker and edgier, more sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So Paris Hilton's Alice inflected French maid's outfit, or Drew Barrymore's Innocence Exploding Nonchalance, are clearly meant to signal something very different to the outfits adopted by former Spice Girl Baby Spice Emma Bunton in a photo shoot on the right here, timed to coincide with the launch of her children's wear range. Alice has then very clearly, I think, become something of a blank canvas, able to absorb a huge range and combination of emphases and directions. She's amenable to a very different set of agenda. Another reason why she's taken up by the likes of Vivienne Westwood is because of a perception of Alice and the books, I think, as quintessentially English, as embodying quaint, endearing eccentricity. This can take a quite conservative, nationalistic, nostalgic inflection aimed at recapturing a lost world of rose gardens, tea parties, cottages, and cucumber frames. But it can also be deliberately subversive, a celebration of non-conformity and rebellion. More generally, and like a whole raft of practitioners across the arts and creative industries, designers, stylists, and photographers respond to and riff off of the inherent playfulness and creativity of the books. And although they're incredibly popular and mainstream, they also carry a huge amount of cultural cachet. They're the product of an exceptionally gifted creative team in the Carol-Tenniel duo, and they emerge directly from the elite intellectual world of Oxford. Although they're accessible and simple seeming, they're also driven, of course, by big ideas and concepts, many of which have been taken up subsequently and explored by some of the most highly regarded artists and thinkers of the 20th century. So it has that, the books, as we know, have that kind of patina, which then continues to draw further artists and creatives to them. So Alice, in many ways, is the thinking child's heroine, but thanks to her uptake in the countercultural movements of the 60s and 70s, she marries the highbrow in a very interesting way with the deeply, sometimes painfully cool. So given everything I've just said, it's little wonder then that when Grace Coddington came knocking, the fashion world responded in their droves. The December 2003 American Vogue photo essay shot by Leibovitz that I mentioned several times earlier featured gowns by, wait for it, Galliano, Donatella Versace, Nicolas Ghesquière, Victor and Rolf, Marc Jacobs, Helmut Lang, Karl Lagerfeld, Jean-Paul Gaultier, and Tom Ford. Quite the roll call. The only stipulation Coddington made was that the gown that they each created had to be blue. The designers also appeared within the shots which recreate scenes from the books, usually in character. So here, for instance, we have Galliano as a high camp Queen of Hearts. And earlier we saw Tom Ford as the ultra dapper White Rabbit. Alice was embodied throughout by the then up and coming 21-year-old Russian model, Natalia Vodyanova. It's possible, I think, to spend an awful lot of time profitably poring over these, I think, really incredible images, which shed fascinating light both on the original works and on contemporary celebrity culture, on conceptualizations of femininity, age, and much more besides. But because I'm running out of time, I'm going to just draw your attention to a couple of the kind of what I see as the sort of most salient features maybe of this photo essay. Firstly, there's this really interesting affinity between Tenniel's consistently unsmiling Alice, and not just Vogianova, but models in general. It's worth remembering that Alice, so often redressed by illustrators, artists, and so on, was in the original text mistaken for Mary Ann. And Mary Ann was 19th century slang for a dressmaker's dummy. Alice is often thought of as a model child, but she also bears distinct affinities then with the fashion model. And when we turn back to the Vogue photo shoot, what of course emerges is that Alice is the model being dressed according to the whims, the sometimes outlandish, borderline insane vision of the various designers who surround her. Alice has very often been recuperated into different settings and contexts, so many different settings and contexts. And it's clear that Alice as a model moving through the fantastical, male-dominated, looking-glass world of fashion also works and is at play here. This shoot was, I think, a fairly defining moment in Alice fashion, establishing incontrovertibly her status as a style icon. It serves as a summation of fashion and of Alice style at that particular moment in time, just after the turn of the millennium. It could well have been, I think, the final word, but instead of that, it's actually triggered and inspired countless other shoots, editorials, and commissions over the last 18 years. Clearly, I think, a shoot like this, or a shot like this, has generated shots like these. And this shows no sign of abating. As fashion has started to diversify, so Alice has been recast and re-energized. Here's another image from Walker's all-black casted Pirelli calendar. The possibilities, or rather the imperatives, are by no means exhausted. As we've seen in this talk, Alice fashion took quite a while to get going, but there's every indication that it's now here to stay. Vital new sartorial inflections, revisions, and interpretations undoubtedly await us. Thank you.
Thank you, Kiera. You know, I have a question. Maybe you want to keep your slides up for a second. It's not
Sure.
It's not scholarly in the least. It's just my own question. Do you have a very favorite frock that you've shown us today? Like, ooh, is there one that just stands out for you? I imagine it might be impossible, but I'm just curious. Or maybe what are a few of your very favorites and why?
Yeah, it's interesting actually, because I'm not sure that I could identify a sort of a gown, but the photograph, it's funny, isn't it? Because I suppose I've been thinking about them very much as sort of composite work. So I love this photograph. I mean, I just think this is incredible. And it does seem to have inspired other people. I'm not so into the Paris Hilton kind of approach, I have to say. Just looking back to see which other ones are kind of good. Yeah, I think that's probably the best one.
All right.
Yeah, don't like that one so much. That one's, yeah. So yeah, I'd probably go with Helmut Lang. If somebody gave me the option of which of these, yeah, that's the one I'd have. Thanks. Excellent.
And I was glad to see you show that commercial, because I was thinking of putting that into one of my montages, but I thought, oh, it's 2 minutes, so maybe not. And also, I don't know, risque. There's a little lingerie in there, so I wasn't sure how many kids would be watching. But
well, it was fun. I mean, that's a high street. That's. I mean, I find that very interesting. I mean, it's worth knowing, I suppose, because that does seem particularly strange, I think. But she has, Rosie Huntington Whiteley has her own lingerie range for Marks and Spencer's. I'm not sure that diminishes the strangeness actually, but that's certainly why that happens.
I think she was a Victoria's Secret model too. I think she spent a lot of her professional life in her underwear, definitely. And if you want to, you can probably stop screen sharing if you'd like. I do have a few questions from our audience here. Arnold Hirschon is wondering, do you have any thoughts about the fashion of Alice represented in Maggie Taylor's illustrations, which are photographic of their time, but reappropriated for Alice?
Eek.
The answer could be no. Does Kiera have any thoughts about it?
Oh, I'm going to have to look those up.
Yeah, she's a very interesting illustrator because it's 100% Photoshop. And she'll get them from so many different sources. It's really fascinating. And I've taken some guff from some of our members when I call them Photoshopped. I mean, they are technically, but we all have such a negative connotation with Photoshopped, but that is purely, she is a purely Photoshop artist. So really, it's fascinating.
I'm gonna Google it while you're talking. I'm gonna see.
All right. Yeah, well, I'll give you the next question and then
okay.
Take a look. And Valina, this is more a conversation starter than a question. During the pandemic, she's noticed that cottagecore aesthetic and style has taken off as a reaction to hustle culture, especially amongst young women in the USA. I wonder what sort of Alice reference we'll see as this style becomes mainstream.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, certainly, I mean, there's something, isn't there, about there's something in this, in sort of Alice couture and style, which is about kind of nostalgia and comfort and safe and weird, yes, say often about safe places, but and returning to a safe place. But that's the thing, is that it also can take a very different inflection, and that it can also be very edgy, and precisely it can do the hustling, I think, as well. And so that it is often quite sort of schizophrenic, actually, and diametrically opposed in terms of what you get. So yes, I'm sure we will get more. And well, I mean, I suppose it depends on the purpose to which it's put as well. And you know, though that the side with Emma Bunton was quite a good. I think that's the thing. It depends on which audience you're trying to reach, in a way.
So Ray Kitty is wondering, when do you think the first photographs were done which sexualized Alice?
That's a really, really good question. And now I'm sort of, in a strange way, kind of going through all of the images I could think of about sexualized Alice's. But that, yeah, that's a very, I imagine, well, does it start with, you know, people posing naked in Central Park in the 60s? Is that kind of when it first happens? But I don't know. I mean, I suppose there's a sort of question about age, isn't there? And this sort of steady aging up of Alice. So a process that begins with the theatre adaptations already in the 19th century. But that is definitely part of this issue. So I mean, I guess it's probably around the 60s. But then again, I have to say, and this was something that did come up a few times as I was writing the book, is that there could well be instances of Victorian pornography which engage with the Alice books, which I haven't researched, and I don't, to my knowledge, haven't been researched. But it wouldn't surprise me in the least bit if there weren't some very explicitly erotic images which allude to the books in the 19th century.
So let's not leave on that note. Did you look up the Maggie Taylor pictures?
I have, but I can't see anything photoshop. Oh yes, I can. Oh yeah. So that's very kind of period based, right?
Yes. Yeah. But it's amazing though. Everything, like at the tea party, everything on the table, those are photos that she's taken. Just every single little thing. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, I'm going to have to look at those.
All right.
Sorry for
quite all right. But thank you so much. And I want everyone to know that Kiera was kind enough to give us her slides. So if with your permission, we'll probably be posting those maybe on our YouTube channel or our website, so everyone can revisit those whenever they'd like. And thank you so much for being here today.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.